Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, this is JudgeSpektre. Now, I've come to find that one of my most talked about videos, or the one that I've received the most feedback on, has been my lame plot twist video on Tenchu Wrath of Heaven. This and my very first video entitled Metal Gear Solid 4 Lame Plot Twists are the only two videos I've ever uploaded on another site other than YouTube. The site I used was Game Trailers. After this, however, I stopped doing that because Game Trailers' video uploader, for whatever reason, hates me, and it might be the unholy energy my videos project, I don't really know, but whatever the case, it hasn't worked since then. But I did get quite a lot of feedback on my Tenchu video in the form of personal messages on there, and I got enough feedback that I thought it was worthy to do a follow-up on the franchise as a whole. A lot of people agreed with most of what I said, and one of the most common defenses of the Tenchu series that I saw was that people say that it's one of those video game series that doesn't really need a competent storyline in order to be good. And to a certain extent I might agree with that if it were not for the fact that they actually made an attempt in the second game to actually have a good storyline, and that was my main problem with Wrath of Heaven. They built me up in part 2 to think that the storylines were only going to get progressively better from here, only to have Wrath of Heaven come out and completely demolish it. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Let's just look at the very first game. Now, Tenchu Stealth Assassins was released in 1998 to the best of my recollection, and the storyline of that game was really almost non-existent. It wasn't very good or well thought out. It was pretty much just an excuse to run around levels and kill people. The gameplay was pretty basic when you look at it now, but at the time it was really interesting. And the storyline was pretty much the same regardless of the two main characters you had to choose from. They each play the same levels and fight more or less the same bosses, and the game ends in exactly the same way. Apart from the cosmetic difference of playing as male or female, there was really no other major difference to speak of. And if the series had actually continued on this line, I would never have even felt a need to do a video feature on Wrath of Heaven. But it was the next game that sort of made that necessary. Tenchu 2 is a prequel to the original Tenchu game, and it picks up years before, where we find our two main characters are much younger and undergoing their ninja training, and we get to see their backstories and sort of what shaped them into who they were in the original Tenchu game. And what do you know? There's actually an attempt at storytelling here. There's actually a decent story here, a particularly well-written one. I mean, not Shakespeare, but it was well done. Each of the three playable characters had their own unique levels, their own boss battles, and their own place in the story. Meaning that if you play the game all the way through with one character, you're not going to get the whole story, and you're not going to know why a certain character behaved the way they did. The only way you're going to get the story all the way is to play it with all three characters. And on the gameplay side, they introduce a lot of different ideas, such as actually sheathing or unsheathing your sword, and doing that would sort of increase or decrease your movement speeds, sort of like a strategic thing of when it's best to have your sword out or not. Dragging dead bodies, swimming underwater. I mean, not all of these ideas really turned into anything that was great, but it was nice that they were at least trying to do different things. And they added a lot more stealth kill animations. There were a lot more sword combo attacks. I mean, they made effort in this game, but funny enough, I look and this game is one of the lowest regarded of the series, which I don't really know. Maybe people don't like change, but if what we've been getting lately is any indication, people should be wishing that they continued doing what they did with this one. Anyway, the next Tenchu game was Tenchu Wrath of Heaven. At this point they abandoned the numbers and went to subtitles, and this picks up a year after the original Tenchu game, Stealth Assassins. And as I stated in my lame plot twist video, the storyline to this game is just completely all over the place. I mean, so much stuff happens. I mean, so many things just get pulled out of nowhere. So much stuff is made up. I mean, I don't think anybody even wrote this. It was just a mess, and And once again, we're more or less down to the bare basics of gameplay, as most of the advancements or the new things they introduced in Tenchu 2 were not brought back, such as sheathing and unsheathing your sword, swimming, and it seems like some stealth kill animations were taken out, and a lot of the combo attacks, the new sword combo attacks, were pretty much removed as well, as you almost just have like a basic 3 or 4 hit combo, and that's more or less it. They did add like ninja techniques that you get by performing a set amount of stealth kills, but most of those were pretty useless. I mean, there were some good ones that were good, but a lot of them were just sort of, yeah. And looking back at the story, once again, the two main characters share pretty much the same levels and bosses just like the first game, except they play their levels and fight the bosses in a different order, but it's more or less the same. And the game does end differently depending on which character you use, which is kind of silly considering Rikimaru is the main character of the Tenchu series, and if the main boss is going to be defeated, it's going to be him that does it, not the female. She should have had a different end boss. I don't even, understand what the thought process was behind that. Oh, that's right, I forgot. There was no thought process behind this game. Now, after this game came out, there was another game that I heard of coming out that was called Tenchu Fatal Shadows, and I was immediately stricken by seeing the lack of Rikimaru, and I was thinking they were going to pull a Highlander 2, like, okay, they realized how bad this last game was in terms of story, so now they're going to pretend it never happened and just keep Rikimaru dead and continue the storyline as with her as the main character. But of course not. That would make far too much sense, and that's obviously not what these people were going for. The story of Fatal Shadows is set after Stealth Assassins, but before Wrath of Heaven, in that 1-year time period when Rikimaru is thought to be dead. And why do video game series always sort of go forward and then backwards and then forward and then backwards? It's sort of like, we have Stealth Assassins, and then we go backwards with the prequels, Tenchu 2, then we go forward with Wrath of Heaven, and then we take a small step backwards again with Fatal Shadows. I just don't get it. Anyway, we have the next game, Tenchu Z, which has no obvious place in the storyline and pretty much is a standalone game, although if you want to tie it in, it could happen any time before Stealth Assassins or any time after Wrath of Heaven. And it was more or less just like a game you could play online with a bunch of created ninjas and stuff. There is a slight storyline in there, but this game was so, disconnected from the whole Tenchu thing, it's not even worth mentioning, really. And finally, the last Tenchu game that I remember hearing about, Tenchu Shadow Assassins. I have not played this game because it's only available on the Wii, and I refuse to own a glorified exercise machine just to play a game in a series which has been on a downward slope ever since 2003. And looking into the future, I can honestly see this series going the way of Siphon Filter. Some of you may know that name, some of you may not. It was sort of like an action spy stealth game, kind of like Metal Gear, which was popular on the PlayStation 1, had a disastrous outing on PlayStation 2, and then quickly sort of disappeared and then reappeared later on a handheld console. And that is where Tenchu is headed, because this is the dinosaur of stealth games. This series is what, like 10 or 11 years old now, and it's still clinging to the roots that it had back in 1998. That's fine, but it needs to evolve, because it's just getting left in the dust. I want to see the series succeed, but if it doesn't get some drastic, and I mean drastic, overhauls in terms of gameplay and storyline, then I'm afraid this series is going to fade back into the shadows from which it came.
I have something to say. It's better to burn out than to fade away.